Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to episode 168 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Hope you've had another wonderful, beautiful week. As I kind of alluded to last week, these are way out of order. So I can't even remember who you spoke to last week. I think it was maybe Connor McLeod, which if so, that was a brilliant episode. Hope you did enjoy it. That was a bit surreal. We kind of got into the ethereal and the esoteric. This week's episode is a special edition. I have three wonderful guests surrounding me today. We've had a little bit of a to and fro with the logistics of technology, which is why you cannot see Guy Coxall's beautiful face, but you will get to hear his input in this episode today. I'm not going to waffle on too much. I want to kind of just jump straight into this because I think this is a very important story that highlights a lot about the state of prescription cannabis and the law in the UK. So without further ado, today's guests are CDAR Future founder Guy Coxall, it's got an S in it, Patientscann director Sal Aziz. Aziz, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Perfect.
Great, sweet. And Specials Pharma founder Umesh Chauhan. Chauhan, soft H? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, it's not too bad. Pretty much there.
I'll take that. I'll take that. I've done worse. I've just had two Scottish guests and I've butchered theirs.
I've been called worse, don't worry.
Oh, appreciate it. Well, I don't appreciate they've actually been called worse, but yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging and accepting my pronunciation there. So, yeah, because there's multiple guests today, I figure what we're going to do for the order for you fine folks at home, we're going to do a quick, brief catch-up with Guy Coxall from CDAR Future, who's got an announcement to make. We're then going to be introduced to Sal and then introduced to Umesh, and then we're going to go on and talk about a recent incident that happened with Sal involving UK police and prescription cannabis. So, Guy, without further ado, I know I keep saying that, I really need to stop, but can you give us your update on your news, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be back on the Simple Life. It's always a pleasure. Sorry my camera's not working today, but it's just a technical difficulty. So I don't know if you know, I won an award with the Cannabis Industry Council in November last year. I won the award for contribution to social impact, which was very nice, and went to a nice posh dinner. But when I was there, I announced to the CIC, and I have announced publicly as well, but some people still don't know. I've retired from the industry. It's not due to not wanting to campaign anymore or not wanting to support patients or anybody who uses cannabis. It's really just it was getting too much. I was constantly getting cases every other day. And it was just me really dealing with them. So it got to the point where I was burning out. It wasn't good for my health. So yeah, technically I'm retired now, so that's quite nice. But yeah, hopefully someone will carry the flame and continue the campaigning for descheduling of cannabis and support patients. But yeah, so that is the news you were talking about, isn't it, Simba?
It is indeed. It is indeed.
It is indeed. Yeah.
No, I secretly think you've been paid off. You're on a yacht somewhere, and that's why you're having technical difficulties. No, I entirely jest, obviously, brother. I can have nothing but respect and appreciation. I'm getting feedback, I think, from your setup guy.
Okay, I'll turn my volume down a little bit.
Perfect. Sorry, it's just going to come up on the recording. Yeah, got nothing.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think as I speak, check. Yeah, it's not coming through on the recording. Yeah, I've got nothing but respect and appreciation and gratitude for all of the work and the time that you've put in. I think you've laid, the foundations for a movement that'll, reverberate for decades to come. You've inspired a lot of people to, stand up as, litigant in person and to challenge the law and to learn the law. And I think, that's what we really need at a time of such uncertainty and ambiguity within the legal framework and within the understanding of, what is cannabis, what are cannabis consumers, what is a cannabis patient, what are their needs and what the industry can do to, best serve them. So I'm grateful that you were given the award by the CIC. So I appreciate that. I'm still picking up feedback somewhere.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I did actually get two awards. I got another one in December. I got a Green Guild Award through Global Cannabinoid Solution as well, which was nice and unexpected.
Excellent. Well, like I said, you've done the work that deserves the acclaim. What are you sort of looking to do in the future? I know you've spoke of quite a bit of wanting to write a book.
Yeah, so I mean, I have started the book, a book on cannabis and driving, because that's the main issue patients seem to have. And there's a lot of disinformation, and it's a complex subject, and it's really difficult. Me leaving, and people are still being prosecuted unfairly, wrongly. So I decided to put together a book which will be basically a self-help guide. So it will go through the history of the legislation, what it all means, how to interact with police if you're stopped, what to do throughout the procedures, but more importantly, how to actually gather all the evidence, how to act litigant in person, and actually put your whole case together and actually represent yourself in court. So it's basically a full manual. When it will actually be published is a bit of an unknown at the moment. I'm still recovering, really. So I'm hoping this year at some point that book will be released.
Excellent, excellent. No, I think that was a brilliant and concise update there, Guy. And yeah, I'll be pestering you in the future. Once your book's all ready and come into market, we'll get you back on the podcast to help promote it as well. All right, let's jump on to the second of today's guest, who is Sal Aziz, who is the director of Patientscann UK. So what is Patientscann UK and what do you do?
Hi, Simpa. Thanks for having me. So yes, as you mentioned, I'm a director of Patientscann UK. I've been part of Patientscann UK team for quite some time now, a couple of years. I became a patient back in March 2023, not long before that I discovered it was legal, incidentally just before a 2-week trip to the Netherlands. So I thought this is a good opportunity to test out cannabis and see if it works for me. And actually, as well as being enjoyable, I must admit, it was also very beneficial for my health. So when I was back in the UK, I looked into getting a prescription, had my consultation and signed up, and then I got my medication through the post. And I thought, yeah, this is amazing. It's actually really helping me. And I thought that would be it. Happy days, off into the sunset. But then I realised actually, like I didn't know, most of the UK doesn't actually know that medical cannabis is legal, particularly back then. And alongside that, there's a lot of stigma, discrimination, misconceptions. So I started having all kinds of issues. Getting on a bus, the bus driver would be like, "Oh, you smell of cannabis, get off." In fact, I went to the King's coronation as well. They had a grandstand for NHS staff and veterans, and the security there, I heard them saying, "What kind of idiots using weed at the King's coronation?" And I was like, "Me, here's my prescription." All of these kinds of things. So that's when I started to look more into how I could kind of try and change this. But what really drove me over the edge was when I was arrested in Plymouth simply for possessing my medical cannabis. Police were like, "This isn't California. I know the law and that's green." Chucked into handcuffs, spent 6 hours in a cell. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I've got a prescribed medicine and I'm being treated like this. Even if it wasn't prescribed, I wouldn't want to be treated like that. But that's another thing. But and I thought, I managed to get through that situation. It was tough, but there's people who wouldn't have been able to have got through that. It would have had very negative consequences. So that's when I decided to hire a car. I drove down to Green Pride in Brighton, my first cannabis event. Met some amazing people, and that's where I met Ish Mohammed, who was running the Sanskara platform, as it was known at the time, just about to do the first medical cannabis roadshow to raise awareness. I thought, yep, I want to get involved in this too. And I've been involved ever since. We've done all kinds of things, raising awareness, trying to get guidance changed. We have caused a bit of controversy as well. I remember back to when I discovered around the laws around public use of cannabis and trying to raise awareness of that, but it did cause a bit of controversy. And I remember your podcast with Kevin Jones some time back where I know he wasn't too keen on the way we did that. And I do acknowledge perhaps it wasn't the best way, but I was frustrated myself. The law is black and white, and yet people just are ignorant to that fact, and patients are being unfairly treated. So I think now what we're trying to work on is really, we're getting national guidance now, which is good, but we need to get that knowledge spread out across the UK. And I think once people are aware, a lot of the problems we're facing will disappear.
Yeah, no, I think that was concise. That was really good. I learned some stuff that I didn't know about you sort of previously, so I think that should be quite informative to my audience. I think, yeah, the episodes that you're referring to, and even more so with retrospect, my issue isn't in the the action per se. It's in its juxtaposition to creating a good and a bad. And it's unintended consequences of creating a binary between those that have the lawful protection and those that don't, when ultimately the discretion is arbitrary at this point. It's an absurdity. And I still hold that position. But in more of a retrospect, I can appreciate your action. I've come to appreciate more of, for all I still call it, the medical cannabis industrial complex, elements within that, their sincere attempts to create better access for themselves to societal norms for normalization. So I commend your efforts, even if I have previously maybe had some grievance with kind of the way it's gone down.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. All right, we'll jump over to Umesh, the founder of Specials Pharma. What is Specials Pharma and what do you do?
Hi. Yeah. Well, strangely enough, my journey's been a strange one. Um, I actually I've been a pharmacist for quite a few years, and I sort of do a lot of RP work, which is for wholesalers to import export medicines. And in about 2018, just before the law was about to change, one of my clients asked me to get them a specific license for importing cannabis. And by 2019, we got the first license in the country, specifically for the trading of. And I said to him, well, you're going to bring stuff in. What are you going to do with it? And he goes, well, we'll sell it. And I sort of said, well, it doesn't quite work that way. You need to do it on prescription, and you need to have a pharmacy. So lo and behold, I opened up Specials initially to help my client out, and you know what, it's got its own legs now. It's run away a bit, So yeah, so it is. It's been an unusual time, and I will admit very much so that I am a convert. When I first started, I was just helping out a client. In my early days, when we were first starting, there was very few patients, and I had time to speak to all the patients. And yeah, you know what? I wish other medical professionals speak to patients and understand better, in terms of the patient journey, how much of a difference it makes to patients. When I speak to colleagues and I say, well, you know what, we give people codeine for painkillers. Codeine just sort of, constipates you, zombies you out, makes you lethargic. And cannabis is killing pain, but it does the opposite. It makes you much more sprightly, lively, awake, So yeah, I mean, there's an uphill battle with all professionals, I would say. But you know what? We're here, and we're here to do that.
Interesting. I could sit and talk to you for an hour or two alone here about the industry and the practice and everything else, but that's not what we're here for. I will take this opportunity to extend to both of you an invitation to come back separately, if you'd both be interested. I mean, wait till the end of the podcast to accept that. I'm not saying it's going to be an aggressive sort of interaction, but no, by all means, I'd like you both back on. Sal, it would be great to get you and Mohammed on and discuss kind of the journey of the company and kind of where you're going future wise. I think there could be a lot of good, not just content but conversations to come from that. So yeah, I guess we'll throw it over to you, Sal, and to kind of explain the background of this inciting incident, which is, as I alluded to at the start, to do with sort of prescription cannabis and driving. So yeah, do you want to fill us in and kind of what happened?
Yeah, no problem. So so I was invited to an event. It was an unlicensed music event, I'll be honest, so perhaps not something I should be going to, but I saw it as a good opportunity from a kind of harm reduction point to try and raise awareness of medical cannabis, because I knew there'd be lots of people using cannabis there anyway. So I thought I'd come along. And another advantage too was that I could act as the designated driver because I knew my friends would not be in a fit state to drive after such an event. So lucky they had me, who doesn't drink and only uses their prescribed medicine. So yeah, we went down to the event. And then I suppose a few hours later, there were police checkpoints at each of the exits. But again, we thought that's not a problem. I've got temporary insurance to drive this car. I've got a prescription. I don't feel impaired. Everything's fine. So we drove the vehicle out of the event to the police checkpoint. So at first they did the standard kind of breathalyzer test, and then they said we'll also need to do a swab test. So I said that's fine. I informed them I am prescribed medical cannabis, so it's pretty much guarantee I'll show you as positive for THC on that. But anyway, I pulled up, did the swab test, which was of course positive as you'd expect, and they also made me do a field impairment test. And it's quite funny if you look at the records for the reason for doing the field impairment test, it's because I looked nervous and shaky. And I thought, well, of course I would be after previous experiences of being arrested and handcuffed and put in cells for hours, and also having anxiety anyway. You know, I was thinking in the back of my mind, you know, in theory, I should just be able to drive out of here, no problem. But in reality, I knew actually the police officers might not even be aware it's legal. There could be all kinds of other problems. But anyway, we decided to do a field impairment test because I was nervous and shaky. And obviously that nervousness and shakiness translated into my field impairment test performance as well. There was all kinds of other things going on there. There's explosions going off in the background at some point, dogs barking. It wasn't a great environment to do a field impairment test. And I think from comments I've seen, a lot of people would struggle with some of those exercises, you know, without any substances in their system, and arguably even more difficult without their medical cannabis in the system, but that's another thing. But yeah, they arrested me anyway for driving whilst impaired and over the limit, took me down to the station to have my bloods, waiting for quite a number of hours actually, until I was eventually released. They gave me my pot of medication back and said, yeah, on your way, basically. So that was that. And then I drove home as I was intending to anyway. So I thought that would be okay. I've got a prescription. I knew I'd be over the limit on the THC. And when they asked if I had anything that would prevent me from doing the test, I said no, but I do have anxiety, so that, you know, could impact things. And I informed my work as well of what had happened, you know, just in case anything did come from it, so they'd be aware. And fair play to all of my managers, actually, they've all been very supportive of that, which has been really amazing, because I know people who could have quite easily been suspended or worse if they, you know, went to their manager, I've been arrested for drug driving. You know, it doesn't sound great to a lot of people, even if it is a prescribed medicine. But yeah, I didn't hear anything for some months, so I thought, oh yeah, okay, maybe this will be all right. But then just before the 6-month deadline, I got the letter through from the CPS that we intend to prosecute. Reason being, your blood result was 3.6 micrograms over the limit of 2 micrograms, which actually is surprisingly low, to be honest, for a patient. But I did wait a few hours before doing the test, so that may have been why. But and also for being impaired, so they said they're going to be prosecuting for that, gave that evidence, and we had a magistrate court date set. So at this point, obviously, I did see if there's any support I could get. Legally, I can't get any support because I work, so I earn just over the threshold, but then at the same time, paying for a solicitor is too unaffordable. You're looking at thousands usually. So, but I met Guy in the past. He's local to me in Devon, and we've been together at events and stuff before. So I reached out to Guy and said, look, I've got this, you know, court case coming up, being arrested for over the limit and driving whilst impaired. Please, can you help? And Guy has been amazing, and he agreed to support me on this case, because you know, it seems like a simple one again. You know, yes, I'm over the limit, but I'm prescribed. Yes, you may have thought I'm impaired, but it's because of my anxiety. So yeah, Guy did an amazing job. He's pulled all kinds of documents together around driving and the law and helped me build a defence for the case. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Guy.
I've muted you, Guy. I'll unmute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you can do. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, as Sal said, he contacted me and asked for help. So yeah, I did what I usually do, put the case together. But it was a bit of a strange case because not many police these days are actually trained in field impairment tests. And I've got another field impairment test case. And what I've realized is that if you have a condition like anxiety or a pain condition or multiple sclerosis, which could cause, spasticity, the police aren't qualified. They've done some basic training in identifying the effects of drugs and, how to do the field impairment test, but they don't, they're not qualified psychiatrists or anything like that, so that they can't actually assess the differences between somebody who's in having the effects of an anxiety attack compared to somebody who's maybe on some drugs. So that causes a big issue, and I'm quite concerned about the field impairment tests for those reasons. There's actually a bit here that I'd like to read from. It's a document that you can find online from the Department for Transport called the Code of Practice for Preliminary Impairment Tests. And section 14, it says, disabilities, injuries, and illnesses. Constables administering field impairment tests must be aware and record any disability, injury, or illness, whether physical or mental, which may affect performance of a test. Being obese or elderly may also affect performance of a test and must be recorded. A constable administrating a test, wherever any of the above is evident or claimed, may nevertheless, if they wish, continue with the requirement to cooperate with the test. However, in such circumstances, the constable must be particularly mindful of the possible effects on performance of the test when interpreting the observations made. In such circumstances, a constable may consider the test inappropriate or impractical. At 15, it also says, it is not possible to pass or fail any one of the tests. There is no benchmark for pass or failure, nor is there any scoring system to indicate relative success. And it's not actually a prerequisite for arrest or an essential element in any prosecution. So basically, the field impairment test is a funny one. It's, and these people with stigma, like, oh, he's got cannabis in his system, he shouldn't be driving, that straight off from the cuff. And then they see somebody like Sal who's shaking and nervous and like struggling with some of the like following instructions. I mean, they're very complicated instructions, some of them. And if you're having an anxiety attack, because I know I have anxiety myself, you sometimes flounder and forget what they said and you do something a bit wrong. And even things like the pupil examination. Sal's case, it's supposed to be between 3 and 6 millimeters, your pupil diameter. I think Sal came out at 2, was that right? Yeah, so it's only 1 millimeter smaller. But of course, because he's used his medication, it is going to be smaller, but that's nothing to do with impairment. So there's a big issue there. So it's really difficult to actually prove in a court because you'll often find that the prosecution and the magistrates are just as stigmatized, and they're trying to find everything they can to have a go. So you're going to say something, yeah?
I'm just trying to be polite. I can't see you, so I can't register, see whether you're finishing your point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just wanted to linger here for a moment because, yeah, like you said, there are some serious problems that haven't been addressed since 2015, as you point out quite often. The changing of the laws for cannabis prosecutions resulted in it going up from the 70s to into the high 90s in terms of percent of success rate of prosecutions. Obviously, then they brought in the swab, etc. The swab, same being with the impairment test, isn't in and of itself enough for the prosecution. It's supposed to be to get you off the street into the station where they can actually use equipment that is often standardized, checked so that it is within its own parameters to be able to be used in a court of law. However, to go back to what you were saying before, the smell of cannabis triggers in some officers a fight or flight reaction in them. They literally, you are now enemy. You smell like bad. So there is no way out of that. Even if you don't have anxiety, even if you know the law, you know the rules, you're dealing with a bigot. In most cases, that is just literally what it is. It's only been what, less than a month we've had the MPCC guidelines, and it is a crapshoot, a lot postcode lottery for how you deal with this person. And if they've already identified you as air quotes bad, air quotes the enemy, you're not going to be able to talk your way out of that. You have to wait until you're in a neutral area, which is then the court of law, because you get dragged in by that sergeant. He throws you in front of the duty sergeant. He checks you in and goes, druggy. And he goes, druggy. And all of their prejudice, all of their preconceptions are then narrowed to you. It's an absurdity. It's a farce. And like you said, around the physicality of things, cannabis affects people completely differently. All four of us could consume the same bud from a plant that I may or may not grow it at my own of, and have four different reactions. Like, it's not a standardizable medication in that way. So the regulations in which and the way they deal with people that consume it needs to be understood, as well as the scientific idea of what tolerance does to the consumer, as Sal alluded to earlier. There are people like myself that if I don't consume cannabis, I would be more of a threat on the road, not less. That's my interjection.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the field impairment test's a funny one, but I think when we did the first hearing in the magistrates, I put the case together with all of this in mind, and it's like a chess game. You have to anticipate the next few moves and see what they're going to do. And I think we had it put together pretty well. And on the stand, when Sal was cross-examining the officer who arrested him, it came quite apparent that he's not qualified to assess somebody with anxiety disorder. So because he's not qualified to do that, that makes his assessment biased. So we pretty much won on the Section 4. But what I wasn't expecting, I mean, I've done hundreds of these cases with patients, and it had never come up before, was towards the end of the trial, the prosecutor claimed that because the patient's prescription was over 30 days, which it stated on the prescription, it's a 30-day prescription, that it was unlawful to possess, and that would trigger point C of the statutory defence, which is the possession element. And that really threw both of us, I think. And, it wasn't expected. And being able to try and argue that straight off the cuff, especially when Sal's representing himself, and I'm not able to speak as a Mackenzie friend, it threw a bit of a balls into the situation. And that led to him actually getting prosecuted. So yeah, that was a weird one. And even afterwards, when I got home, I started thinking about the implications of that, because I wasn't really 100% sure on the law to that regard. Why is it a 30-day prescription or a 28-day prescription? You got the PRN, which means you can use as necessary, but does it become unlawful, or is it over a certain period? So I started doing loads of research and contacting the CIC and different people, and that's actually when I was recommended to contact Umesh, who in my eyes is an absolute star, and he put together a document for us that we could have used in court, which was brilliant, and it basically just clarified the position, clarified the law, and that was great. Until we got to a few days before the court trial. I think it was the Thursday. Sal got a letter through from the court, basically saying thank you for submitting Umesh's letter, but unfortunately, on its own, it won't be accepted as evidence. You would need to call Umesh as a professional witness or an expert witness to the trial. Now, I've tried to do this on several cases in the past, trying to get consultants to come and support their patients, and quite often it's a battle. In fact, there was one time I even had to actually get a court order to get a doctor to appear in court, and some of them don't even get back to you, and they're just, it's impossible. And this is somebody's future. They lose their job, they lose their house, they lose their family. It can cause massive devastation to people. So I sort of cautiously and called Umesh on the phone and said, I'm sorry, mate, but would you be able to? It's really short notice, but would you be able to appear for a court case next week? And surprisingly to me, Umesh was like, yeah, no worries. Like, what do I do? And we had a good chat. And I was just, we need more people like Umesh in this industry. People who actually will go that extra mile and support patients in these sort of situations. And I've got massive gratitude for that. And that actually did lead I mean, I'll let maybe Sal and Umesh like continue into the different technicalities of it, but we did actually win on appeal. And if we hadn't won an appeal, you could tell the prosecution were really wanting this win. Because if you had that win, then suddenly it would have set a precedent and patients would have been arrested for possession, for driving, all sorts if their prescription was over 28 or 30 days. And that would have caused massive devastation to not just the industry, but to patients on a whole. So yeah, I'm really pleased we got that win. So yeah, I'll let you carry on. Maybe ask Sal a bit more about the actual the appeal.
No, well covered there. Yeah, do you want to jump onto either Umesh? Do you want to talk about was the input into the retrial, the appeal? Sorry, Umesh, or were you involved in the first trial, or the first part of the trial?
No, I wasn't involved in the first part. I think when it went to Winchester Crown Court, that's when Guy contacted me, and that was the appeal. Just to say, look, you know what? Can you help us with some of these guidelines? And I must admit, I thought it was very strange, the questions that Guy wanted me to answer, because they were quite straightforward. So yeah, it's one of those things, and I'm not being rude to the prosecutor. I'm not quite sure if he did his homework, but yeah, Guy may be correct that there may have been a separate agenda, but definitely, at times I felt like the prosecutor was clutching on straws. So.
I imagine that it's the CPS never likes to go backwards. Never ever. There, for all it is quite a flimsy filter, there is a filter by which cases that can be prosecuted and cases that will be prosecuted are differentiated, shall we say. All right, Sal, so you stood a litigant in person. You cross-examined a cop. How'd that feel? How was that?
Yeah, it was quite a daunting experience all around, as you could imagine. I mean, as I said before, I even went to court the first time. I was quite lucky because I was able to reach out to a guy and get all of that amazing support because, I know a lot about medical cannabis and I've done a lot of research into these laws, but when it's happening to you when you're in the firing line, it's very different. It's hard to, look at it without the emotion and look at it rationally. So yeah, it was very helpful to have that support and guidance. But as you say, I was still litigant in person. I had to represent myself and speak in court, which was quite an experience. And it took some time to get there as well, because even when we went to magistrates the first time, the prosecution had a personal incident of bereavement, I believe. So they had to adjourn the trial again for several months, which, already been waiting months at that point in limbo, waiting for an outcome. And during this time, it's harder to get car insurance because a lot of policies, they won't give you a policy if you've got a pending conviction or a pending trial. Even at work, I had to be put off driving duties until they could find out if I could drive or not. And so all of these impacts. But eventually we got to court the second time around, the magistrates court for the trial. I had an amazing bundle of paperwork, thanks to Guy again. And yeah, as I think briefly alluded to, it seemed to be going pretty well. I asked the police officer, how could my anxiety impact on these different steps and all the questions along those lines. And they said, I can't comment, I'm not medically trained. And the key point around the wording of the Section 4 is that the prosecution need to prove that you was impaired, but impaired by the medication, and that needs to be beyond all reasonable doubt. And they couldn't prove that impairment was because of the medication, and they couldn't prove that beyond all reasonable doubt. So that was that bit. And again, the Section 5, I thought that would be okay. Using my medication as prescribed, I've got a prescription. I was over the limit, but I've got the medical defence. That's when the prosecution raised issue around the 30-day point. I'd been using it after 30 days, and also the fact that the medication was expired by a couple of weeks. And I did try to show them I happened to have a travel letter with me from the 11th of March till the 19th of March for Cannabis Week, incidentally, which would have been, after the 30 days that they're saying I shouldn't have been using it for. And I tried to argue, if I can't use it after 30 days, why would my doctor write me a letter to travel abroad and use that medication if I shouldn't be using it. But yeah, they weren't having it. And they said, so they found me guilty of the Section 5, and they put aside the Section 4 because, like I said, there was too much doubt there. But surprisingly, they still prosecuted for the Section 5. They said, it says 30 days, you used it after 30 days. And I tried to argue as well, where in the law does it say I can't use it past those 30 days? What law have I actually broken there? What guidance have I broken from my doctor? But yeah, again, they weren't having it and they found me guilty. So, I was furious, really. I thought, I've got a prescription. I don't think I've done anything wrong here. But like Guy, I did start questioning myself as well, actually, because I haven't really, thought of the 30-day or expiry date thing before until you're kind of in this situation. So again, I started looking into it. I got some more documents from my clinic at the time as well, explaining that, the medication is used when needed and that patients, may go beyond that date and so forth. And as well, I've got the amazing letter from Umesh as well after Guy asked those questions. Got a nice bundle of evidence together to show to them, that, using the medicine past 30 days and past expiry isn't unlawful. And that's a clinical discussion that needs to have kind of thing. But yeah, they didn't accept any of that evidence. As Guy said, I got a letter through saying, no, we do not accept this. We need a professional witness, which, is crazy, really, because, you're meant to, the prosecution need to prove that you're guilty and you're innocent until proven guilty. But, it feels like the other way around, where you're having to prove you're innocent. You're having to seek out these professionals to prove that you are innocent. And, it shouldn't be that way because, it's amazing as Umesh has been, there's so many driving cases and you can't really get all of them. So there's something does need to change there. But luckily we did get Umesh. He agreed to come and I'm just so grateful for that. And we turned up to the Crown Court for the appeal 4 months later, 4 months without my licence, 4 months of struggling to get to work, to get between parents for care and responsibilities, struggling for all kinds of things, just because of incompetence in the legal system is how I would put it, really. But yeah, luckily the appeal didn't take too long. Only 4 months is surprisingly quick, actually. Sometimes I was half expecting that my ban would be over by the time I got to appeal, but no, it wasn't like that. Very quick. Yeah, almost caught us off guard, actually, because we didn't have long to get all of this evidence together and a professional witness. But yeah, we turned up to Winchester Crown Court, went into Court 7, and immediately there were problems for the prosecution. Their witness wasn't there. PC Loynes hadn't turned up again. Well, hadn't turned up for this case. So they were frantically trying to work out where is he? Is he in the court somewhere? And it turned out they'd got the dates mixed up. So that's why he hadn't turned up to court. But it wasn't an issue anyway, really, because he could only really comment on the Section 4 stuff. But as we said, he could comment, but he can't really comment because he doesn't have the medical expertise needed to determine the key points there. So, and the prosecution even said we're going to try and raise issue with the fact that my defence statement was later than they would have liked, yada, yada, yada. But the judge came in, all rise, and from the get-go, he was basically like, you need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that an offence is being committed. It sounds like you're asking the court to make an inference here, but we'll proceed anyway and see how it goes. So already I'm thinking, yes, this is sounding positive. There's someone who actually knows the law in the legal system. Oh my gosh, that's what we need. And the prosecution tried to, raise issue around the 30 days, but the judge was like, where in the law does it say that, that's an issue, whereas the doctor said he can't use it past the 30 days, all of this kind of stuff, which is what we tried to argue in magistrates, but it was just so refreshing to hear it from the judge and set the tone very nicely. And even around the expired medication, the judge made a point, it's like if you get milk from a supermarket and then, don't know, you leave it in your fridge and it's a couple of days past expiry, not legal to drink that milk. You can just give it a little sniff, and if it's okay, chuck it in your coffee. Happy days. And he said as well, he's got controlled drugs. I can't remember, some kind of painkiller, which, millions of people will have controlled drugs of some kind laying around in cupboards for months after they've been prescribed. Does that mean that suddenly millions of people are breaking the law for possessing a controlled drug? Obviously, the answer is no, but again, it was good to have that laid out from the judge to the prosecutor. And I think they had a trainee solicitor with them too, so I think they learned a lot of that day as well. So yeah, and then it got to the questioning point again. I was cross-examined by the police officer, by the prosecutor, sorry. And you tried to, raise all kinds of points, but the judge wasn't having it. He was saying, "Oh, is that medication in your prescription pot the medication that was prescribed to you?" And the judge had to cut in and say, "You need to make a bad character application if you think there were unlawful drugs in there." And he said, furthermore, why are you prosecuting for possession if you have an issue with that? Why did the police give the medication back to me at the police station if there were concerns around unlawful possession? And I thanked the judge for that, and I said I asked the prosecutor to be more respectful because I didn't like that, implication that just because I'm a medical cannabis patient that I could be breaking the law like that. Is fair. So yeah, it wasn't going very well for the prosecutor at all. And then around midday, that's when we were joined by Umesh on the big screen, which was great because they didn't even know that Umesh was coming along. They were emailed by the court, and they found out this in the morning when they were looking for their police witness. They said, "Oh, we've got Umesh in the waiting room." Like, "Oh, who's that?" They had no idea. So that caught them off guard as well.
Nice.
But yes, Umesh did turn up amazingly. And went over the background. I don't know, maybe you want to go into this more about what you did, Umesh, because it was brilliant.
Yeah, jump in, Umesh.
So, wow, Sal, that's a bit of a journey for you, wasn't it? Really. But I sort of, I think I agree with a bit of your first point that I do think that the judge actually had done his homework and actually understood the issue much better, a lot better than the prosecutor did. So I came on, and the first question that they did sort of hit me was on the 30 days. Now, there is no law that a prescription for a controlled drug is 30 days or 60 days or whatever. It's actually guidance. So during the court case, I actually put up a screen shared and put up what it says in the BNF. If you don't know what the BNF is, it's the British National Formulary, and it's written by the GPHC and the GMC. So the sort of the top-notch guys at the farm societies and the doctor societies have put together this document. And within that document, it quite clearly states, the 30 days is a guidance. Doctors may prescribe more than 30 days, but they need to actually document the reason why. People go on holiday. They're going to get 60 days or 90 days or whatever, yeah? So, these things happen. And I think, once that point was made, the prosecutor sort of switched gears a bit. But he said, look, on the right-hand side, it says 30 days. And I had to sort of say to him, well, look, the left-hand side's the actual prescription. It is the actual legal document. And the right-hand side's your repeat bit, and if you go on an NHS prescription, you'd get on the right-hand side a bit where you tick your boxes to say, what, this is what I need, yeah? And it means nothing. Absolutely means nothing. And the other thing we sort of discussed, and it was about justification. Well, the meds are PRN, which means when required. Now, PRN medication can take you, a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months to finish because it's there to top up or help with uh, periods of issues. It's not there, as a regular med where you take one twice a day. It is actually there for that reason. And we see PRN medicine used a lot in palliative care or in a lot of elderly or in pain care, where a patient may get morphine sulfate tablets, but they'll have maybe morphine liquid as a PRN. So it's quite regular. And that PRN could go on for a while. So once we established what PRN meant, and my Latin was bad, and luckily the judge jumped in and he actually, you got to remember, Simpa, I did my pharmacy degree about nearly 40 years ago, so my Latin's obviously off, But yeah, so once we got that, and as I said, they are relative simple issues, but the prosecution was trying to what would have been unbelievable change in the law, because then you're going to get a lot of palliative care patients who can't use their prescription for more than 30 days. That does not, that does not compute. So since the time that I've been a pharmacist 38 years, that's never happened. That would have been a major change, and I suspect it's never been like that since, the beginning of the NHS. So, so yeah, it was a strange one. So sorry, I sort of digressed, but he switched gear and he was looking at the right-hand side and he said, well, it says 30 days. And I said, well, that's the repeat part. It's just an indication that, there'll be a 30-day supply. Then he looked on the prescriptions. He says, well, if you look at this little box, it says number of days, 30 days. I said, well, that's correct. But the reality, it's a PRN meds, which can go on, indefinitely. And then again, I think that point was made. And I do think the judge was, as I said, quite sympathetic, because there was time that the prosecution kept on trying to ask me the same question, but in a different guise. And the judge himself sort of went, well, actually, he's answered that.
The CPS trying to trip up a defendant? That's unheard of in the British justice system, Umesh. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then we went down to the expiration date. Now, expiry dates are there for patient safety. And, we put expiration dates on things because at a certain point, we know that there's going to be some change in the potency. So something that might be 100%, at a certain point might lose 3 or 4%. And most companies will look at about 4 or 5% potency loss before they say, all right, that's it. Or that drug will actually, because of air or some other, or moisture, will actually change. And again, may be harmful to the patient. Yeah. Mm. So that's why we have expiration dates. So, if patients use it, look, as a medical professional, myself, doctors will always tell patients, well, you can't really use it after the expiration date. But the reality is, when I dispense a prescription, and this is something the NHS tells us, yeah, when I dispense a prescription and I hand it to you, that's your property. Yeah, that's, like money in your pocket. That is your property. And this is something the NHS actually tells you. Yeah. And because it's your property, it's got to be, handed to you and all the rest of it. Yeah. What you do with your property, I mean, I can advise you, but if you take it after the expiration date, you take it after the expiration date. There is no law to say that you can't. And strangely enough, in the same vein, I used the milk example, and the judge started laughing, and he goes, I went a bit quiet, and he goes, oh no, I'm just laughing because I use the same, So yeah, he was on. He obviously knew his stuff. So that was, I think that was the good bit,
Well, I think what you're
Yeah,
witnessing there was the difference between sort of a crown and a magistrate's court in terms of the education and the implication of the judiciary in its decision making. It's as I was kind of alluding to before, speaking on before of the police. Same thing I wanted to ask Sal about. So it was experience within the court of just again, you've turned up drug. That's all they hear. Anything after the fact, lawful defense, blah blah blah. They're not hearing, they're not seeing. When you were being cross-examined by the prosecutor, Umesh, did it come up that the prescription is a pad and it's a standard document, and if most things are then prescribed with the recommendation of a 30-day window versus what was the acronym, PNR? For
PRN, yeah.
PRN, always mix letters when I hear them. PRN, then that's the unusual thing. So that's then stated in the legal handwriting of the prescriber. Could they not just get their head around the logic of the
No,
standard?
no,
Was it being deliberately
yeah.
obtuse? Did you have the opportunity, or did Sal have the opportunity to question them on their understanding, or did the judge sort of chastise them over? Well, I don't know. You said before how they were sort of asking circular questions, as it were, trying to get you to give different answers. But was there a point of exhaustion? Like, how did that sort of close? Were the prosecution happy that they'd exhausted every avenue, or did the judge kind of shut down that inquiry?
You didn't shut it down in the sense of, you've got to stop there. But because the prosecution was asking the same question in different guys, and the judge kept on interrupting them and saying, well, you know what, he's answered that. He's answered that. And I think literally they couldn't figure out a different way to ask the same question.
Mm.
And I think that in itself stopped the questioning. I think, they'd sort of run into a wall. And in fact, to be quite honest, I think the prosecutor sort of made that wall, because of how he was, attempting to do that. So, as I said, I showed him a snippet of the BNF. That helped immensely because, it's a recognized document. It's a document that we use, TRN, when required, in itself tells you that drug is going to be used for longer. I mean, it's actually logic. And I think the judge used logic to come to the same conclusions, But again, no law around how long you can write a controlled drug. No law about whether you, with your private property, i.e. your meds, whether you take them after expiration. And in fact, on occasion, and I think this is about 3 years ago, EpiPens were short of supply. And the advice we were then given is, even if you've got an expired EpiPen, use it. It's preferable to death, basically, So, that should tell you volumes.
There's a question I do want to really ask here that's related directly to this that would slot in well, but I want to keep our chronology and timeline. So I've made a note and we'll come back to this at the end. So, what kind of happens next in the process, Sal? How did it kind of go down once sort of Umesh had given evidence?
Yeah, I think by that point, it was becoming very clear what way it was going.
Your mic's coming through very loud. I'm picking up all your background when you're speaking.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure. Wait, is it okay or is it still?
It's a bit loud. Wait, I'll turn you down in my ears and I'll fix you in post. Just keep going.
Okay, thanks. So can you repeat the question again, please?
After Umesh gave his evidence, what's happened next in the procedure for the what's it called? Appeal.
Yeah, so Umesh gave his amazing professional witness statement and answered the questions. And as I said, I think it's the prosecutor and their nightmares that night was probably hearing a loop of 30 days PRN, 30 days PRN. It's like, can you not get that into your head? It's PRN, But anyway, luckily, as Umesh said as well, the judge was having none of it. And I think it was really clear by this point they had zero evidence. There's just any wrongdoing. We had professional expert evidence, so the cards were really stacked against them. So after that, we went away. The judges made a deliberation, And yeah, as expected, they in their summary they read out, obviously the issues the prosecution were trying to raise, around using it past 30 days. But again, it's that PRM point that's key because, correct me if I'm wrong, Umesh, but I think if you had a medication, a controlled drug that was prescribed for 30-day supply, you had 30 pills and it said you must take one a day, and then you were using it past, then there's probably an issue. But when it's PRM, then it's, as we've noticed, it's not unusual to go beyond that point. And I love that you brought up this milk analogy around the expired medication, because I've never been in a court where everyone's laughed like that. I mean, I've not been in court much, but yeah, I had to try and hold my laughter when you said that. But when I saw the judges laugh, I thought, yeah, I'm going for it too. But the prosecutor wasn't laughing for some reason.
So, can I ask a regulatory question while we've got Umesh? Because you raised an interesting point there of, say, a medication that does say your physician recommended guidance is to take every day. You get 30 of them, but is there an allowance within the regulation and the law for just being forgetful? Like, I've got ADHD. Yeah. I waste probably 4 cups of tea a day going and starting them, putting the water in, going, I'll be back in 2 seconds, coming back for a cup of tea and going, shit, and starting the process all over again. Like, do you know what I mean? Is there things built into that regulation?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, it's a guidance. It's not law. And in fact, sadly enough, when we've had patients that have died, when I worked in retail, and they'd come in with their mums or dad's meds, and you would probably see about 4 or 5 months of controlled drugs where they've just been ordering, but not taking it on a regular basis, but they've just been ordering it. And I mean, sometimes they come with huge bags, full of meds that, that's just been accumulating on a shelf for 3-4 months. So it's not unknown. It is something that happens, But again, I think, in terms of the court case, there is no legal basis. It is guidance, It's best practice for want of a better way of putting it. So again, as I said, I'm not sure where the prosecutor, got the idea. It's almost like he read the prescription and thought, without doing his homework.
Clutching at straws by the sounds of it. They'd looked at every other avenue, and that was the one thing. Like I said, they don't like to go backwards. Once you've gone in front of them, they win. That's all they're trained for. If they don't win, they lost. So that's entirely why I can see this going the way it was. I just wanted to sort of clarify that, just off Sal's comments there. So then the judge made sort of the ruling. What went on with that? Sort of how did that feel? What were the implications of that? When was that? It was quite recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the 10th of February, so 8 days ago at the time of recording this. So yeah, not long ago.
Right. You'll be seeing this within 2 weeks, folks. Cutting edge journalism from the Simpa Life right here.
That's it. But yeah, no, it was amazing. He said, despite what the prosecution were trying to raise, there's nothing in law that says I can't. There's nothing in my medical records that suggests I've been told I can't. So with all of that in mind, like you found me not guilty, and the appeal was successful. So yeah, it was it was incredible. Because like I said, it was the end of March 2024. I was arrested, and we're in February 2026 now, so it's been nearly 2 years to try and actually get that outcome. And it's just a big weight off my mind, for all kinds of reasons. Again, I've had so much support from work and those around me, but imagine if I went to them after a Crown Court appeal and said, actually, I've still been found guilty. It doesn't look great, does it? But so was that really fair? But also, for so many other patients, I've posted some clips of my initial arrest and so forth, and I've been quite overwhelmed by the number of patients reaching out with, similar issues where they're in court because, they're over the THC limit, simple things like that, or they're trying to get them for impairment, even though there's no evidence of impairment in their driving. They haven't done a field impairment test, and they're making people go through the court system, wasting, their time, money, causing undue stress, and it just seems completely unnecessary when there's no other offences suspected. Of course, if someone is driving impaired and that's cleared, that shouldn't be happening, cannabis or no cannabis. And if someone is over the legal limit of a drug and it's not prescribed, I mean, there are some cases where I think that's unfair, like cannabis, because you could not smoke for weeks and still fail that, but that's another thing. But I understand the laws for laws for that. But, when you're a prescribed patient doing what you're told and you have to go through 2 years of pain to prove that actually I'm innocent, which again feels so backwards. It was a great relief, and I hope now that it's gone to Crown. I don't think it sets precedent per se, but it's very
it's High Court that automatically sets precedent. But I think it could be used in reference and as part of defence, but not mitigation in similar cases. So it's not only that what you've done here shows the path. You blaze the trail, you leave the path in the Emerson sort of tradition of it, as it were. What my next question comes in the way these systems really learn is by getting stung. So the CPS is slowly starting to accumulate this debt from all of these cases. We've got somewhere in the region of 400 to 500,000 court cases backlogged in this country. Yet all these cannabis cases seem to be getting in through the door. Because previously they were big earners. They were easy prosecutions. Same with the driving thing. Detection equals impairment. That was the standard. That's what they've been trained in. Like Guy says, they're not trained in understanding the nuance of all these other things, because in their head, cannabis, drug bad, drug drive, ooh, devil. Do you know what I mean? As simplistic as that sounds, but that's the way it comes down. The judiciary as well generally is looking at, you're a druggie. If you've put me in front of you and you're a druggie, you're a druggie. Drugs are bad, you're a bad person. And unless people challenge these systems, these individuals, every person you interacted with your case is now learnt. And so hopefully next time that somebody gets put in front of them, automatically, rather than pulling out these stupid and absurd attempts to just get the win because the win is what they're after, they actually go, oh shit, justice, that's supposed to be a thing we're here for, isn't it? And then it starts to trickle down from the CPS. Obviously, the National Police Chief Council guidelines, which has gone live recently to treat cannabis patients as patients first and suspects second. This is starting to have effect. I have a friend who I'm not going to name, obviously for legal and personal reasons, who was stopped recently during the what is it, ANPR check, where they scan your number plate, they get a load of information from you. It came up, prescription. They walked over, asked him, "Are you prescribed?" And have a medical defense of anything. He went, "Oh yeah, and they went, "Oh cool." Handed him his license, left him on the way. They immediately recognised, and that's just the officers. I'm not saying that's the whole of Durham Force at all. But in that one instance, they knew enough, or maybe even if it's just getting close to the end of their shift or whatever. But giving those cops that discretion and that understanding and the education that they have an emphasis to act is going to take a while. So we have to rely on that discretion. So what lessons have you learned sort of from the process? I know, as you said before, that you've put up quite a few videos, you're sort of breaking it down and presenting guidance and guidelines. That's obviously something that Guy's been doing for quite a long time to Seed Our Future. So yeah, I'll start with kind of you, Sal, and then we'll kind of go around just sort of what you've learned from the experience, and then we'll sort of go, and actually include it because we'll go around what you think we can do to kind of improve the status quo, the law, education, awareness, etc.
Yeah, well, I've definitely learned a lot during this experience. It's been very educational, I think, for everyone involved, as you mentioned. I've probably learned a lot along the way because cases like this haven't been very common in the past, but they are becoming more and more common, particularly as patient numbers go up. And I think, again, the implications, not just for people prescribed medical cannabis, but anyone using controlled drugs and driving, is really important that prosecution and courts and police can begin to understand that. So I'm still waiting for all of the paperwork to come through. It's still very fresh, but I've kind of waiting for the outcomes to come through. I've put in freedom of information requests to everyone as well to try and get a full chronology of what happened from the different parties, because I think it'd be interesting to know as well, like from the CPS, for example, what kind of conversations they were having for them to want to push this so far, and was there anything else at play there? But I think the national guidance, as you say, is a great step in the right direction. I mean, I think Durham Police is quite cannabis friendly anyway, generally. But
we were under our current administration, although I think the police crime commissioners and police victim crime commissioners and the police fire commission, all of that, those bundles of political authoritative institutions they created are getting removed in 2027 by the Labour government. So we'll lose the PCCs and go back and default to being run by our chief constables, which I think will be a more progressive step because unfortunately we've gone and done a vault face, to borrow a term from the history of our space, on their stance from Ron Hogg and Mike Barton's day of being incredibly progressive. We now have, I'm not going to name them because then people will say I'm having a go at them, Chief Constable and Police Crime Commissioner. Sorry, just to clarify that.
That's good to know. Yeah, things change all the time, don't they? But
Constantly.
yeah, but again, I think the national guidance will be a really big help because it clarifies that medical cannabis should be treated just like any other prescribed medicine because it is a prescribed medicine. So we need to treat it like we would someone driving with morphine, codeine, or any other controlled drug. So I think we will get there, and it's been really great as well because myself and Patientscann and Ish, we've been speaking to one of the officers who've been involved in that guidance and developing that to try and get some different points clarified. And again, they're going to keep an eye out for this Crown Court case once that's publicly published, because it would be important to include that in the guidance, some of the ramifications, because I think there was I don't think it's just the prosecution who thought along those lines around if the medicine's past 30 days or expired, then it's unlawful. I think there were a lot of officers thinking along those lines too and trying to use that as part of, should we arrest this patient, should we not? Actually, this medicine's 2 months past their prescription, maybe we should arrest them. I think hopefully, again, this will make it clear, actually, no, you shouldn't arrest them because it's not unlawful for them to possess or use that medication. So, yeah, it's not just driving. It's I think patients would be grateful to know that they don't need to worry around using their medicine past the 30 days, unless, of course, they've been explicitly told by their doctor not to. But again, it's a PRN medicine. I'd be very surprised if they were told to.
Yeah, no, interesting. Actually, no, let's go. Sorry, continue to go around. I'll because everything I'm going to ask is going to move us away from this chronology. So, Umesh or Guy, whoever wants to go next, as to what you've learned from the experience and what you think we can do to kind of, improve the system status quo, etc.
I'll go by if you like. So I mean, I think it's a big win, and I think it can be used if it rears its ugly head again. I'm convinced that the CPS were trying one on and trying to get like that sort of determination, and it was ridiculous. So he did keep saying the same things to Umesh and trying to argue the same points, and it was flogging a dead horse. It wasn't going to go anywhere. But I think there's a lot of even professionals sometimes get these things wrong and they're not quite sure. I mean, one of the first people after Sal got prosecuted the first time, one of the first people I contacted was actually Robert Jappi, and I asked him for some guidance on this, and he was under the impression anything beyond 2 months past the date of the prescription makes it very difficult to argue in a court of law and that you could be prosecuted. So I'll let you, when we move to Umesh, I'd like to ask him on that question. I think as you say, it's until you finish your prescription or even after post expiry. So I think this provides clarification for professionals within the legal field as well, which is great. So yeah, I think it's making a difference. It's all education. Education is key. I've done a lot over the last decade putting things together, and it's a continuous journey. And I hope organizations like Patientscann and that will carry on doing this education and like talking to different patients, seeing what the outcomes are and developing things. Same with the book that I'm writing. I think that will be a useful resource for patients for future. I mean, I could write a whole chapter just on Sal's case, really, and that specific area. So yeah, I think it's just a progression, isn't it? It's slow and it's difficult, and especially when you're fighting the judicial system and the way the police interact. But I think the worm is turning; it is slowly going in the right direction. But time will tell, really. There is one question just before you move over to Umesh that I wanted to ask actually regarding the BNF, because in the BNF, I think it's label 2 guidelines, which like refers to sort of impairment, like drowsiness, things like that. It talks about alcohol usage. So if you prescribed a CBPM, it basically recommends. I recommend that you don't use alcohol. Well, it actually, hang on, what does it actually say? It says avoidance of alcoholic drink is recommended because the effects of the CNS depressants are enhanced by alcohol. So it's not a prohibition; it's again an advice. But I've got some tubs of my medication, and it's got 2 labels: one from the importer and one from the pharmacy. One of them says "Do not drink alcohol," and the other says "Avoid alcohol." Now, if I was, because I do like a drink, I don't get drunk and use my medication, but I might have had my medication the night before. I go out for lunch with my wife and have a glass of wine. Now, if I got pulled and they breathalyzed me and did a swab, I would come up positive for both. Now, that could actually stop me getting my medical defense because one of the labels says do not drink alcohol. And so that would mean I'm not following the guidance from either the prescriber or the consultant. So I'd just like Umesh's ideas on that. And if I'm right that, it is only guidance if it says avoid alcohol, but if it says do not drink alcohol, then that's a direct
Instruction.
quote sort of thing. I'd like to know from my perspective where I would sit or whether standardization could be implemented within the industry so that you make sure it only says avoid alcohol, all labels, and it should never say do not drink alcohol because that puts patients in jeopardy of being prosecuted.
Okay, so I think the do not drink alcohol is probably a standard BNF label. But when we do have imports, when I'm bringing in goods from anywhere, the MHRA dictates the fact that they want to avoid alcohol, and I think quite rightly, I think the label needs to be changed, and we probably need to talk to the guys who write the BNF and say, well, you know what, we need that avoid alcohol element. Sorry about this element, But yeah, I mean, for sure, what we do find, and again, I'm not sure how pertinent it will be. I think that the warning is there to stop you from operating machinery and driving, But we've got a law out there, and obviously, if you drive over the official sort of limit, then regardless of whether you're a medical cannabis patient or not, you're going to get prosecuted, And I think that's the only thing I can, sort of come from that. So the BNF
I see where you're coming there. I see where you're coming from there, Umesh. But say to give you an example, right? So I medicate normally on the evenings. I don't really medicate in the daytime because I don't get work done. Not that matters too much these days. So say I've medicated the night before because of the pharmacokinetics of THC. It will stay. I'll always be above the limit of THC in my system, above that per se zero tolerance limit of 2 micrograms. But if I had, let's say, a drink with lunch and I'm well under the limit, but it would come up on a blood test that I have, say, maybe half of the limit of alcohol in my blood. Having experienced your experience last week with how the prosecution are, they're going to argue all the way down the line that because I've got alcohol in my system and it says do not have alcohol, then I'm not following the guidance, and therefore I wouldn't get the statutory defence for being over the limit for THC, and then I'd get prosecuted for drug driving. Does that make sense?
Well, no, not unless you're over the limit. But I mean, but
no, he's saying that it would nullify the medical defense, thus reverting it that he wouldn't have a defense for THC. So being over the per se limit, he would then be prosecuted for it because the alcohol would nullify the prescription. It's the same argument that's made for the combustion of cannabis.
I think the key
not,
thing to note as
not
well is in the law it says it's around following the instructions in relation to driving. So the prescriber's instructions in relation to driving around the driving offences. It doesn't say instructions full stop. So I think that's the key part. If there's any instructions around driving, for example, if it said do not drive, then that's one thing. But because it's an instruction that's not related to driving, then it wouldn't be taken into account in that matter, is my interpretation.
the BNF warnings are advisory warnings. They're there to stop you from, taking meds that might make you drowsy and then you fall down the stairs. So, they're there for a reason, but they are not a solid instruction. Now, if your doctor on his prescription says do not drink alcohol, that's a legal document. Yeah.
So is it the nuance
you know,
between a
that's-
prescriber's instruction and a manufacturer's instruction? The manufacturer are then issuing do not drink alcohol, but the physician is not explicitly saying do not drink alcohol, therefore they'd get away with the drinking alcohol? Would that also then work with the combustion of cannabis if it's not explicitly stated by the prescriber that they have to vaporize, even though it's a recommendation?
So vaporizing is slightly different. I'm not going to. That's a whole new can of worms. But I think what you've got is an advisory label on the pharmacy label. What you've got, if this was a licensed med, this would be what the drug company, after years of research, would have to put as a warning. Now, the warnings may be different. And I'm going to go back actually a bit more, Simpa. The problem we currently have, and it's a lot better, is, back in 2018, the regulations were changed by about, 5 or 6 paragraphs, as opposed to a whole sort of booklet of information informing the police, informing healthcare professionals. Something that could have been written on the back of a cigarette, yeah, quite easily, yeah. That's how much it was changed by. For the last 4 or 5 years, every agency's been scrambling to get guidances, and sometimes they contradict each other. So it may be a case that the GMC and the pharmacy probably need to catch up with the avoid alcohol label that needs to go on there. It's something that probably needs to be looked at. But again, this is all about the sort of the various conflicts that we find. There isn't one solid voice. And I think you guys probably have experienced that on more than one occasion. And I know from my patients' experiences that even with the police, it's not consistent. You have a spectrum at one end where the police will say, no, all cannabis is illegal. And the other end where the police goes, well, all cannabis is legal. And then you've got a whole sort of cacophony of things in between. That has always been the problem. The guidance, I suppose the way the law was set, it just did not help anybody. And I think especially in the early years, patients hated it. Absolutely hated it, We've got a bit smoother now and a lot better. And I do think the agencies now sort of talk to each other. And we're getting there. We're not there though. There's still a lot of work in terms of the regulatory issues, and I think there are some sort of little grey areas and little cracks there that unfortunately will have to be qualified. We'd have to go and say, well, actually, that's advisory on the BNF side. But again, I'll come to the point. If you are drinking over the limit, then I suspect you're just going to get done for drinking. Rather than anything else. So,
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. So Guy's going to jump in to state it. You've answered the question, but to clarify the question, even though you've given us the answer for continuity's sake, is that even if you've had a small amount of alcohol, a detectable amount of alcohol, but it's below the legal limit, and you are also prescribed THC, and because of the pharmacology, the pharmacokinetics of cannabis, you consume it, it'll be detectable in that saliva for many, many days, and then in the outer bits of the body, the hair, nails, etc., from potentially months after the fact. That if then you fail the swab, you go in could then a similar, malicious prosecutor try and argue in a court of law that the alcohol level, even though it wasn't over the limit in the law, that having it there, having the instruction saying to do not consume alcohol would nullify the lawful medical lawful defense under Section 5A or 5 whatever section it is in the 1988 Road Traffic Act. But you've answered the question effectively, that that's then given as recommendation, even though it's worded as an instruction.
Yeah. I think it's a separate issue driving with alcohol. Even look, if it's right, so medicine's odd. If you've got two things that can make you drowsy, it doesn't mean that you get an accumulative effect. That effect could be 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, or half the time more. Yeah, very difficult to prove unless you've got empirical evidence, clinical trials to suggest so, yeah? So the reality is, I would suspect, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but the law will only be able to deal with what the law deals with. So if you're over the limit, yes. If you're under the limit, no. It's then going to have no bearing, really.
But it's sorry, go on, guys.
See what you're saying, Umesh. So going back to my analogy, so I've medicated at 9 o'clock at night. There's plenty of scientific evidence that shows that if you vaporize your cannabis, the potential impairing effects generally last 3 to 4 hours. So by the next lunchtime the next day, there's absolutely no effect whatsoever from the medication I've taken the day before. But then I go out, have some lunch or with business or with my wife. I have a glass of wine with my lunch, which is perfectly acceptable. It wouldn't impair my driving because it's well below the limit and I'm entitled to drive. But as I said, under Section 5A3, the statutory defence for medical patients, I would fail on not following the guidance from the prescriber. Or the guidance information. So I would be prosecuted. And I am anticipating this to be probably the next Sal case, if you like. That will be the next one. And I've kind of been anticipating it for a while. At some point, somebody's going to get prosecuted because they've got a small amount of alcohol in the system. So I think what I was asking really, Umesh, was, with your standing in the industry, if you were to contact the BNF and actually challenge this labeling on ensuring it says avoid alcohol rather than it's all linguistics, rather than do not take alcohol, that will protect patients from potential prosecutions. So maybe all the top pharmacists could get together and write a letter to the BNF and just get that clarification, get the standardization on labeling, and that would prevent the next series of these court cases, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So look, what's written on a prescription, a label, is advisory. As I said, the BNF, they're advisory notes, yeah? But what's written on the top, that is the authorization. So if it says avoid alcohol, that's the actual bit that matters.
Okay.
We would call
more the actual dispensing label rather than the importer label. Is that what you're saying?
No, the importer label, the actual label on the package, where it says avoid that. That's the real one. I mean, if this was a drug with what we call a marketing authorization, i.e., a normal drug, then we would call that that would be something that would be highlighted as part of the official warning. So if it's actually on the drug label, or you get something called a patient information leaflet and it says it on there, then that is, that pretty much tells you how you take that med. But the BNF warnings are advisory.
Right.
It is what the package says. You'll see, when you see some, these days, any drugs that you buy, like, again, like normal drugs. And I always fall back to what would I do with a normal drug? Because, cannabis is a normal drug. And unfortunately, some people sort of think of it as, not a normal drug. But the laws for normal drugs apply to cannabis. Yeah. So if there is something on the actual label, not the prescription, not the pharmacy label, but the actual packaging label that tells you not to drink or not to do this or not to do that, then that's the actual instruction. And as I said, the MHRA had back in the day they would say do not drink, and then they changed it about 2 years ago, I think. Avoid alcohol sort of came in possibly 18 months or 2 years ago.
I think it was recommended to the CIC a couple of years ago. I think that was a recommendation actually that I pushed through Guy. That went in around your driving paper. Last year?
Yeah.
Year before?
It was a few years ago, I think.
Every time we change year, my brain just collapses on understanding how many years ago anything was. So until
I think the
everything was a couple of years ago.
I think the problem was because it's imported from different countries have their own different rules. So if it's coming from Canada, it will say one thing. If it's coming from Australia, it says another thing.
Well, isn't this where
that's what I'm talking about, the standardization?
Good manufacturing practices come in, though, in terms of then the standardization of the label and in the UK regulations?
Regardless of which country it comes in, the label's actually defined here, and the MHRA will say yay or nay to the label. So whenever I'm doing an importation, I will send a copy of the label. And again, the instructions that you'll see are going to be standard. Everybody will have the same instructions. The MHRA every importer will ensure that the same instructions are there because we've been told this is what the instructions should look like. So that there is standardization. Around all this. To be quite frank, there's a lot of standardization. It is treated like a normal drug.
Yeah.
I think, again, as well, if you look at the law from a driving perspective, again, I think it's obviously you've got the defence under subsection 3, and it says under section 5A subsection 4, it says the defence is not available if your actions were contrary to any advice about the amount of time that should elapse between taking the drug and driving a motor vehicle, or contrary to any accompanying instructions about that matter. So the amount of time that should elapse between taking the drug and driving a motor vehicle. So even if it says do not drink alcohol, you can still raise the medical defence, would be my interpretation, because you're not disobeying any instructions around the amount of time that should elapse. This is a different instruction. And I think as well, from a court perspective as well, if they did try this, it says, do not drink alcohol, full stop. Does that mean do not drink alcohol whilst I'm using the medication? Do not drink alcohol the day I was using the medication? Or does that mean I'm not allowed to drink alcohol for the rest of my life? Of course, it wouldn't be that, but, from a legal perspective, if it did go to court, I think it'd be very easy to show that actually you haven't got any evidence, again, that I'm committing an offence, and you have to accept my medical defence here.
Yeah, I think it would fall into the same. This is what Guy alluded to before with the phrasing of the next Sal case. All it takes is the prejudice of the judiciary in the first instance, the lack of the ability to get an Umesh in the court that knows, alcohol pharmacology, etc., and can put all of this together in a situation that the CPS is happy with, and then you'd win it. You'd win it on appeal. Sorry, go on, Umesh.
No, I was going to say, look, there is no, as I said to you, having alcohol, there is no empirical evidence. What are you going to put forward? That, all right, I might be below the drinking limit and I'm taking THC, but there's nothing there to evidence whether that's good or bad. And it'll probably just come back to this impairment test.
Well, yeah, it's circular, but it's the same as in Sal's case. There was nothing in the law. If the law was applied fairly, justly, it wouldn't have resulted in that situation, but it did. These cases are going to continue to happen until there is more stringent guideline that understands how legalese is used as a nuanced weapon to, I'm trying to I'm trying not to get too animated here, but to keep certain systems in play. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
There's become this self fulfilling need for this industry to protect itself, but only within its own confines and boundaries. And it's not until instances like this occur that they go, oh, issue, draw attention to. Because for all a lot of patients are not getting served, we're now 2026, we're going to be 8 years this year. And the kids that were all in the photo shoot that was arranged for this shit in 2017, all of them are still paying for their fucking medications, all of their oils. This, you know what I mean? We've not moved forward really. The industry is growing, and yes, patients are starting to get protection, and guidance is being written for housing, for education, for employment, for driving, etc. As you will have all have astutely observed this evening, today, I'm combusting. I only get the benefit I get from combustion. One of my previous guests, Dr. Riley Kirk, I'm getting her back on actually, folks, sneak peek, very shortly to discuss her paper on the unique pharmacology of combustion of cannabis, including the compounds and their unique medicinal applications. So another issue that I can foresee that's going to happen is the law is really fucked in that every other prescribed drug in the UK, as you said, that's your property. I made the very crude analogy previously, and I'm going to bring it up again because first I find it funny and it'll break the tension. You can buy a carrot. You can take that carrot home. You can use it for a nose of a snowman. You can dice it up into a nice salad, or you can shove it up your arse. The law doesn't care. It's your carrot. Yet cannabis, within a subsection of the law, states that combustion is prohibited. Why is this the only thing in all of medicine within the UK that has this issue when there is no definable evidence base to suggest that combustion versus vaporization causes any impairment, any psychosis, any danger that it can actually be quantified other than it being artificially held next to tobacco studies?
I think the answer to that again, is quite simple. Smoking or combustion is not an official route of administration, and that's why pharmaceutically it's just not allowed.
But why is then in the law I could crush up benzodiazepine and sniff it, and I'm not gonna get charged for it because there's no offence to the consumption of it. There's only an offence to the consumption of combustion of air quotes, CBMP, cannabis-based medical product, you know?
Well, I think the MDR, the Misuse of Drug Regulation, does specify that smoking is not allowed, it's not permissible. But the reality is, in terms of pharmaceutical form, there is nothing to say that smoking is a route of administration. And that's the key difference. Yeah.
So thousands of years of history isn't relevant. The entire basis of all the knowledge base we have for cannabis being based on the combustion of cannabis globally.
So look,
I'm not being facetious, sorry. I'm just,
yeah.
I felt that it would be remiss
if
we didn't discuss this.
I can't, that's a separate question. And I think if there's empirical evidence to say, hey, look, you know what? It's better that, you smoke cannabis rather than use a vape. And that's put forward. And we change the actual, I'm trying to remember what, I think it comes from the Human Medicines Regulation, where it's not viewed as an official route. Yeah.
But why is it then that's criminalized, but making an oil or an edible isn't then criminalized?
In what sense? Edible
is an edible an accepted route? Then why isn't that criminalized in the same way combustion is?
I mean, there is probably a grey area with edible, because if it's meant to be oral, then you could say, well, I've taken it orally. Yeah.
What have I been doing all?
The drugs. Yeah, but look, there is.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be facetious, Umesh. I'm really not.
The humans, oh my gosh, the Human Medicines Regulation doesn't allow for smoking. Now, that regulation, if it changes, then I think that would have an implication around everything that,
Is
Uh,
there a
uh,
base? Is there a basis for that in the rules? Because I would assume because it's such an exceptional rule to the nature and spirit of modern pharmacology that it would require in itself evidence to show that the smoking of cannabis is somehow more dangerous than these other drugs that it requires that. Because again, as you stated before, being prescribed Oromorph or other such opioid-based medications for their own regimented use rather than regulated use. You can't show what they're doing behind closed doors, how they're choosing to, combine these drugs, break them down chemically.
no, you can't. And I think um, the, the advice I would always give people is that you cannot smoke. So if you use your head and don't smoke in public places, then you're not open yourself to prosecution. Um, but in terms of, as I said, it's not a route of administration. If you can get that changed, then you know what? It will change the MDR, and it will probably allow combustion to happen. But that's the change that really needs to be made. Now, just to give you an example, oddly enough, I'm writing a leaflet. Sorry, I should be talking about. I'm writing an article about gummies because one of the patients I do an article, ask the pharmacist, and the patient asks, "Well, I've heard gummies are banned." Well, they are, but they're banned because they're called gummies. You call them pastil. There is no difference between a pastil and a gummy, and that's an official dosing form. So that would be allowed. It's just, it is those sort of phraseologies that can change things.
Out of interest, and you might not know off the top of your head, but smoking, is it explicitly banned or is there just nothing to say you can? It's explicitly
The
banned.
smoking of cannabis is prohibited.
Or medicines, full stop, I would imagine. Because
It just states that on the bottom of the regulations. It's like a standalone thing.
But in terms of this pharmaceutical guidance, so it could be because historically there are also medicines like opium which were smoked, and it could have been because of that back in the day.
Interestingly, was prescribed to be smoked back in the day, but yeah.
Yeah, so maybe they
Yeah.
changed that and just banned smoking because they didn't want any medicines being banned. And as you mentioned, maybe it does need review nowadays. If there could be medical benefits to combusting anything, then I think you shouldn't rule it out and it should be researched. But
I mean, but then why would it require more research than the vaporization of cannabis? If that's an off-label prescription medication, why would then it to be allowed to be used to smoked rather than vaped suddenly need more regulation and input, other than the fact that there is obviously, I would argue, a prejudice at this point because of what happened with tobacco. You combust tobacco, the companies lied to us for decades. We ended up with all of the issues, COPD, cancers, etc., all of the problems. You've now what we're dealing with nicotine. That's going to be a whole nother problem with the vapes and all of that crap with VG, PG, etc. So I can understand the hesitancy of that. But my little conspiratorial brain, if I put my tinfoil hat on to reference the old school days, it's to keep, there's a difference. The traditional route for most people, you buy your cannabis, you grow your cannabis, you go get your Rizzler, you roll, you smoke. Vaping then has a clear difference, and it's about creating a two-tiered thing where it then separates the good ones and the bad ones. And that has always been my issue and my gripe with the medical cannabis industrial complex, is that for all it does, it serves the need of some, it then creates an artificial binary where then it allows the prejudice and all of the history of prohibition to continue on those that don't afford, don't access, don't know, or don't believe in the prescription system. So all I'm sort of working on, because one of my next projects now, I've come back from sort of semi-retirement, I didn't mean to, I've just been busy fighting other projects, is Patients for Alternative Consumption Methods. A movement to challenge these things, because there is the entire history of humanity. Vaporization is the oddity. It only started in the early 90s. If you go into Sensi Seeds Museum in Barcelona, you can see one of the first adaptations of it with Ben Dronkis. For the handheld, what became then the evolution of the modern devices that are used and recommended today. And I just think it does a disservice, and it creates this further binary and division between the history and the continuity of activism and the culture and prohibition and everything that entails, good and bad. And then suddenly it just capped, and then there's this other thing that shoots off. And I think that there are ways to accept people of all consumption methods within that, within the guidance, with it being an off-label medication. It's just, like I said, it's one thing that they've added into the law, like you said, into the MDR 2001 regulations when it was with the amendment 2018, that you cannot combust cannabis. That's the oddity I'm questioning, is the logic, the reasoning. If there's no scientific basis for that, why they've done that artificially, but you can then vape. There's a question in there somewhere. Sorry.
I think it's very
I think
interesting. When you had Dr. Riley on last year, and she was talking about like the smokability tests and how certain cannabinoids you can only access through combustion. Is it CBC turns to CBL, which increases serotonin levels? So for somebody like me with depression, that's actually really useful. And I actually combust as well, and I find it more therapeutic than I do. I don't really get the same from vaping. But she was stating that 80% of medical users in the US prefer to smoke. I mean, that's an interesting figure. Why is it that 80% prefer to smoke rather than, and you've got much huger numbers over there than you do here. So there's obviously something about smoking that actually has more therapeutic value. And there's,
Well,
evidence going back
to
to the
some,
Indian Hemp Commission in the early 1800s, where they proved that actually long-term smoking doesn't actually cause much in the way of negative effect. And you go back to gummies, you're adding sugar to it. the most common drug, and that's not healthy. So actually, if you go down this sort of, is it healthy or unhealthy, so it's an interesting like whole debate. And I think as time passes, hopefully smoking would become allowed, because it's the only regulation in the MDR 2001 that's been placed for any Schedule 2 to Schedule 4 drug. So I could get some opioid tablets, break them up and snort them. And although that would be against what the doctor or the pharmacist has told me to do, I wouldn't get arrested for possession under Section 5(1) of the Misuse of Drugs Act for doing that. It wouldn't be an illegal, a criminal offence. But with cannabis, if I smoke it, it's a criminal offence because of this regulation under 16A of the MDR, which actually is a qualified opinion because it preceded the actual industry before there was any flower being allowed as a CBPM, because I think the government really anticipated it all being oils like Bedrocan and things at that stage. They didn't anticipate flour being sold through pharmacies for medical use. So I think it was more of a political statement rather than something that's been backed by science. But that's my opinion anyway.
just want to clarify one point. You said is benefit more beneficial. I'd say to the individual. Some people will gain more benefit from just vaporization of flowers or from carts of certain ratios of cannabinoids and terpene profiles, etc. Some people
absolutely,
from it was a
I was more talking about me, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a definitive statement. I just didn't want the audience to hear that this is a smoking versus vape thing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's
If you want to
we're for
vape, yeah.
widening access, not saying you cannot, can't, or you should. You should all be able to use cannabis and choose your own route of consumption. As far as I'm concerned, I know obviously the law is, like we said, a grey area. That's the whole point of the discussion. That was
Autonomy of
my one.
health and physical integrity, which is a human right under the Human Rights Act.
Yeah. So you wanted to
I
respond there,
was,
Ramesh?
yeah, I was going to say, your example, Guy, actually is an off-license use of the drug, yeah, which is a bit of a grey area, and I don't think there is anything out there in case law or any other law, but it would be termed as an off-license use of a drug, and there may be some issues around that. In terms of combustion, I think there's two key points that will make the argument difficult. The first, obviously, as you've highlighted, Simpa, there is a public health agenda to, reduce smoking to zero in 2000 and whatever. Or I don't know, is it another 20 years or whatever
It's been pushed down the road again.
Yeah. So, but the other thing, more importantly, for something to pharmaceutical, there should be an ability to measure what dosing is. And that's the key issue around smoking in terms of, will it be allowed as a, a pharmaceutical way of taking your medication? And the key issue is that you can't actually meet a dose set
How can you meet a dose?
when you come back.
A vape, people get 10 grams in a pot. Somebody stacking a fat ball for the the extendable thing for the volcano could be putting half a gram in there. Somebody making a small Pax little insert could be putting 0.2 in there.
So the vaporizer should be able to provide some way of measurement. Otherwise, it's just quite rightly say it's dark. It doesn't work, but it will give a measurable, because that would be one of the sort of tests to ensure that the routes, whatever route or whatever dosage form, is measurable. So that, for example, if you know exactly how much a patient has had and that drug's not working, you can go, right, great, I'll up it. And in fact, a simple example is, things like inhalers, and doctors were forever prescribing a steroid in higher and higher doses, because they thought it wasn't working for the patient. But the reality was patient technique was so bad that the steroid was hitting the top of their mouth and not going into their lungs. Once it was going into their lungs and they could measure that, dosages went down.
So
that's the purpose. Yeah, that's the purpose. That's the actual purpose of dosing. Yeah.
So is the issue being it's closed loop? So a tablet, a vape cart, a vaporizer, because you are connected to it and there is no leakage. You are saying that then creates a measurable thing because you've got to determine the temperature, you're connected to it, you've got the whole dose of what you've got from that. There is no thing.
Oh.
But then surely things like metabolism in the way that tablets work. Say if you take a lot of CBD and you turn off a cytochrome P450 enzyme in the liver, and you can get a cumulative impact of the pharmaceutical drugs. Like there's things that will then change the way that you'll digest and consume and react to those drugs. Cannabis has to be prescribed as an off-label because there is no, as you say, there is no standardization. It's closer to a botanical than it is a pharmaceutical, but the loopholes say that cannabis is prescribed as a cannabinoid delivery system delivering a ratio of CBD to THC. Everything else is effectively a contaminant, yet all of those other contaminants arguably are having more of a medicinal impact. If we look at other industries around the world where they're actually allowed to observe the proliferal compounds, terpenes, sequester terpenes, flavonoids, cannabinoids, even the interactions of the waxes and the lipids, etc., and how the synergy of these create obviously what we term the entourage effect, for all that's still apparently contentious science in these day and age, or at least it is in this part of Europe. There's so much more to this thing that we're handicapped because of the regulations, and I just think this is another thing that is limiting the industry. Like I'll admit, all of my prescribers have been cool. I've known, frankly, far more about the plant, about the industry and its history than they do. We have a nice little chat about shit. We talk. I explain what it is, and we go on with our days. But some of people don't have that ability to have that honesty, and to then have to lie to a doctor and go, well, actually, I know that vaporization doesn't help for me, and I'm going to smoke this, and pay to lie to a private physician. That's not good for mental health. That's not good for honesty, transparency, for continuity of care. It's not good for us actually getting over the prejudice and the discrimination that we faced from all of these systems. It feels, and I'm not blaming you, Umesh, and I'm not saying you are, please don't take this as an offense, that the industry as a whole is it's a predatory practice. This group of people want security. They want to keep their driving license. They want to keep their job. They want to keep their ability to live day to day and actually maybe get out of the cave and not be scared that they smell of weed, as Sal was speaking of before. This system comes along, offers them help. When people have reached out, you're actually the exception to the rule from what I'm hearing. Guy's been trying to get people like you to defend people for fucking years. And you were the guy that stuck your head above the parapet. So again, doff my cap. But the industry needs to do more to listen to patients, as you said at the start of this. And I'm going to say till I've been blue in the fucking face, combustion of pure cannabis helps me far more than vaporization. I have all the tools. I've tried all the things. Believe me, every industry rep has been in my inbox for years. I have had the invites, done the thing. it's not my thing. But I don't want to then face potential prejudice under the law and criminalization because I fall into this grey area. We're here today to celebrate a victory to whiten, to use that analogy instead of the white black grey area. That sounded a bit white power. Didn't mean it to. And illuminate would have been a much better way of me describing this, to illuminate this situation and to prevent others. And that's all I'm kind of trying to get at, I guess, in this
Yeah.
conversation. Do you know what I'm saying?
But simply, you do touch on a point. Um, uh, and I've always felt this from day one, that what we've tried to do with medical cannabis is put a square peg into a round hole. We've tried to emulate it to normal drugs. Now, that's clearly, or should have been clear, that cannabis should have been treated differently. In fact, maybe it should be a new medicine type. And I think I do actually write about that. What we've done is, we what we should be doing is actually having one body, one agency that deals with medical cannabis, and deals with it in a manner that it should happen, and not try to, just, as I said, fit it in an existing round hole where it doesn't fit properly. We know that. I know that. You know that. But unfortunately, again, the reality of life is that this is what's happening. And like I said, I don't think it's the industry per se. I think it's in the UK, and I suspect in other countries it's dealt with differently. I've got a feeling off the top of my head, in Australia and Canada, it is dealt as a different entity to normal drug.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's the difference. And until we get that foundation sorted out, we're going to be stuck with, cannabis being aligned with something that's got, aligned with your paracetamol. And unfortunately, that's what it is.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that? Because I mean, I made the same argument. I was in Jeremy Corbyn's Sun ear leading up to the election when he was leader, saying we need a ministry of cannabis in the UK, but not for medical this, hemp this, whatever this, for cannabis, the plant cannabis. And then within that would be an offshoot, industrial applications, concrete, cannabis, graphite nanofiber materials. Do you know what I mean? Research and development around like commercial applications of the plastics, for example, etc. Something around, yeah, applications within medicines, something around like how it fits into social use regulation similar to alcohol, etc. in the UK, you know what I mean? And how to facilitate public access, best practice, etc. That's the only way that I can foresee this kind of working together. But I think a step within that, like you said, is to almost go backwards. Before pharmacology, we had botanicals. So we had, I think we have one of the oldest. Oh, Guy, you might need to jump in and save me on this. What are they called? It's like the body of like botanical studies is a word I'm struggling for that I need to change out with botanicals here. What is it? What the hell is it? I'm struggling here.
Sure. Sorry.
Um, basically, it was
Natural
before.
medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, I can't think what the hell this body is called. Another three-letter acronym. Basically, before drugs were modern drugs, modern pharmacology, the standardization of drugs into like sort of a sodium chloric form and into a sort of standardized injectables, etc. Obviously, everything was just derived from plants. That body that I can't think of right now that is really hurting this conversation. They would regulate it, like I said, as a plant first, so all applications of it. So then from that you could derive then a tincture of say a terpene heavy oil that would then be used as a topical, say for example, like rosemary oil.
Herbalism.
Huh?
Herbalism.
Herbalism. Fuck me running. Sorry, guys. I hate it when that happens. Yeah, herbalists. We have the oldest I think one of the oldest herbalist societies in the world. Oh, the relief of my brain right now. Thank you. Yeah, treating it like a herb in that sense because it was like rosemary food, but also you could, like I said, make rosemary oil. Men of my age, you should be using it for your hair, for example, if you're starting to thin or whatever, it's good for your skin. But like I said, you put it on your chips, lush, mix it in mashed potato. You know what I mean? So it's a food, but it's then also got a direct application as a is another word I'm missing. A therapeutic. Yeah, I think that's the way to describe it. But it's still the same product. Do you get what I'm saying? So I think that's where the evolution of this needs to go, is to accept that cannabis is a plant with all of this plethora of compounds. And if you're only going to prescribe it for the limitation of these cannabinoids, then they need to be extracted for those cannabinoids. Or you prescribe it and have all of these other things, and you talk to the patients. Because currently you're prescribed a 20-to-1, and you could be given something that is so high in limonene and makes you anxious as an anxiety patient, but your prescriber doesn't know because they've just matched a 20-to-1 at 20-to-1. But if they're allowed to talk about these other proliferal compounds that have a dramatic effect on the overall therapeutic impact of the consumption of cannabis on the patient, then we can have a wider care. We can have better health. We can have a better understanding of the plant. And I think if you widen that out eventually, the law catches up, and that's what creates the sort of the decriminalization by the back door, that the plant becomes decriminalized and the medicinal applications then become the patented drugs that have been worked on behind closed doors for the past 20 odd years. The next three generation of drugs from GW. That's then where people like yourself, I believe, should be involved. Whereas the botanical should be sold through the herbologist. It should be still regulated, but it doesn't need to be up there with opioids because of its quite benign usage in general population.
As I said, and that's why I think we need to have a sort of a separation from classic medicines to we can call it a herbal medicine, we can call it what we want, whereby you've got people that understand it better and will regulate it in a different manner. And I think that's quite an important point. I think we need to work on.
Absolutely, 100%.
Excellent. We've done the impossible. I've actually asked every question on my sheet. Actually, wait, what wrote it? Oh no, these are links to include later. I'm reading my own notes for what to put underneath. I suppose we'll work to wrap up here then. I guess I don't need to ask Guy where people can follow your work. People who have it beaten into their brains. Is the Seed Our Future website still up and going?
Yeah, the Seed Our Future website is still live and it will get updated. I will put more resources in there, things to help patients for court cases and things. Yeah, as I said, I'm still in recovery at the minute, but yeah, this year, keep an eye out on the website and it will get updated.
Excellent, excellent. We've got Sal next, I guess. Where can people sort of keep up with your work? Where can people watch this video of your heroic arrest?
Thanks. Yeah, so you can follow Patientscann UK on socials at Patientscann UK, and we've got a website too, patientscann.org.uk. And I've also got a personal account too, Delta 9 Saltiva, where I'll post some of the more personal sides of things of this incident. But yeah, I'd recommend definitely follow Patientscann UK because, as you've mentioned, I've got the guidance, but that's just the start. There's a lot of work for us to get on with. So hopefully you can join us on the journey.
Excellent. Umesh, I see you're writing for the boys at Leafy. We do like Kevin and Liam, the previous guests. I'll be dragging them back on the podcast in the not too distant future as well, because I do like chatting with them too. So yeah, you're their in-house pharmacist. Is that how they've described you?
I think they've described me as the agony pharmacist.
Agony
So
pharmacist, that's it.
yeah, so we get questions. Like I said, I think that the next article is about why gummies won't be allowed, and as I said, it's terminology. It's all terminology. So yeah, look, to be quite frank, it's actually quite an experience. Doing these articles, it was out of my comfort zone. But I'm enjoying it, to be quite frank. So a bit like the court case, again, really out of my comfort zone. But when the facts, and I suppose like most pharmacists, I like to understand the facts, and when the facts were brought to me around 30 days and all that, for me it was just one, that's something that I can A, help with, but B, there's no gray area, and sometimes that's more important, there's going to be gray areas everywhere. It really depends if it's a very dark gray or a very light gray, but yeah, it was very, very straightforward. And I think that gave me the sort of confidence to say, yeah, look, Guy, I've got no problem.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I guess we'll call it there. We'll pause now, and then I'll come back in and I'll do my housekeeping. Is that what you're phrasing? Yeah, housekeeping, and wrap up the rest of the podcast. So yeah, thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time today. Really appreciate and respect you all, actually coordinating and us getting this. I think we recorded that really well. So yeah, thank you all very much, and yeah, we'll see you again sometime very soon.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, massive respect to all three of you. And Umesh, thank you for the help last week. Massively appreciated. And I think that went really well. And yeah, good luck, all of you.
All right, so goodbye. Peace and love, guys. Peace and love, guys.
Cheers.
Well, there you go, folks. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. I think that was probably one of the best multi-guest episodes I've recorded. I was just praising the guests there in terms of the chronology of events and the way they kind of naturally just handed over to each other. We didn't all shout over each other. I know I got a bit animated towards the end when I was sort of defending combustion and we were talking about sort of the fragilities and the issues with the law. I got a bit lost with the word herbalist, which is weird considering my love for sort of ragtech music. But yeah, still enjoyed that. Hopefully, I'll be able to get Sal and it's Mohammed and I can't remember the name. I think of the other director. If we can get all of the team from Patientscann UK, we will and have a discussion in the future. I'll chase up Guy Coxall, obviously, once he's producing his book later on in the year when that's sort of coming to market, as it were. We'll get him back on and discuss kind of the process, kind of what's in it and what people can expect, where to get it, all that usual jazz. Yeah, Umesh, really appreciate you making the time. It's rare to get people in that sort of side of the industry on my platform. I guess kind of because of my reputation. I don't bite really. But I was gonna say I don't take shit. Not that he gave me shit, but like the situation shit in terms of the fucking industry. So to be able to kind of talk that out and have that conversation on the record, I think was quite important. So I do hope I'll be able to kind of get him back on in the future, and just kind of keep that conversation going because he did seem really responsive. He did seem really receptive to kind of the issues, especially like I said around kind of combustion. I think that's a massive problem given that it is the only consumption method of a scheduled prescribed drug in the UK that is criminalized. It would seem every other consumption method doesn't have a prohibition upon it for a consumption method. There is just recommended advice. I would quite like to have got further into sort of the legal understanding of recommendation through doctors. I've obviously made the analogy in the past of, if I was obese and I kind of went to the doctor and they recommended, joining the gym or trying to be more active and they found me eating KFC, I wouldn't then get in any trouble for failing to, follow my doctor's advice. There is no kind of law around that. There will be a case, and I don't doubt it, in the not too distant future around combustion. I think Guy's contribution around sort of the alcohol labeling and the inconsistency there is somewhat of a problem. I think it is, like it was discussed, is sort of being sought to be rectified, but all of these things are problems. I think, as I spoke on one of my diatribes there, that sorry, my cat's just started scratching at the door and it's just completely caught me off. Hey, buddy, I'm nearly done. I'm just finishing the end of the podcast. I said, like, during one of my diatribes there, it feels like the industry in some way it's operating with predatory practices. It's yeah, 2 seconds, baby boy. It's seeking to, exploit, maybe not intentionally. I kind of feel it's intentional, having met some of the big boys and the vulture investors up at the top. Yeah, I'm finishing up. Yeah, I'm finishing up. Um, you've just made me lose my train of thought 'cause you're too cute. Yeah, they're exploiting sort of, patients that they are making money from this when patients are still reporting issues with the system, with the law, and until Umesh, in this case with Sal, very few, if any of them, have put their head above the parapet to protect patients' rights, to stand against the judiciary, which stand against the CPS in a judicial setting, to defend their patients' rights, and to, force the law to be respected for what it is, the fucking law. All right, this little boy clearly wants some food, so I need to get out of here. We're wrapping this up. This probably is about 2 hours. I think I'm doing all right. They're trying to keep to my 2 hour rule here, folks. All right, if you've enjoyed this, please do give me a like, a thumbs up, a heart, a share, whatever it is you do on your platform. Show appreciation. I appreciate it and appreciate you. Don't get off that. Sorry, my cat's destroying my desk. Buddy, check out thesimpleife.com for exclusive blogs, articles, and my back catalogue of Weed World articles, which is getting updated, so do check that out. Yeah, there's something else I normally say. I can't think what the fuck. Patreon. Check us out on patreon.com/simplelife.com, where for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep the lights on this little project of mine. All right, you've been beautiful. I will be back next week with, I don't know, somebody. It'll be awesome. You'll love it. All right, take it easy, folks. Peace and love. Yo, how's it going, folks? Welcome to I nearly said 168. Immediately tripping over me on tongue.